Before I begin, I want to thank you for taking a moment to listen. If stories like this matter to you, you can like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment. It helps keep accounts like this from disappearing. What I'm about to share is something I avoided talking about for a long time. Not because it was classified, but because it was easier to treat it like rumor or coincidence. This is not a story meant to scare anyone. It is simply a record of what happened. If you have spent time in the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix, some of this may already feel familiar. This is where I stop framing it and start telling it the way it actually happened. My name is Jacob Aaron Mallory. I am a federal fire lookout assigned to the Ochoco National Forest in Central Oregon. I have served 11 years with the United States Forest Service. The last 5 of those have been spent rotating through high-elevation detection posts east of Prineville, with primary assignment at Round Mountain Lookout. My jurisdiction covers dry forest, rimrock canyons, and seasonal grazing land that burns fast and quiet when it goes. I am not suppression. I am not enforcement. I am detection and delay. I am the person who sees it early and keeps it small long enough for someone else to decide what comes next. The tower sits just under 7,000 feet. Lower than some. More exposed than most. The Ochocos do not look dramatic from a distance. That is a mistake people make. The land rolls instead of rises. Sound carries oddly. Wind moves in layers. You can hear a truck on gravel from miles away, then lose it completely when it should be closer. During fire season, the air dries out until it tastes metallic. At night, there is very little light pollution. No towns. No highways. Just long dark stretches broken by cattle fences and old logging cuts. The radio is your only constant. It is how you report smoke. It is how dispatch checks if you are still upright. It is how you pass the hours without leaving your post. Phones do not work here. Satellite units are reserved for emergencies and logged carefully. The radio is always on. You learn its habits. You learn the difference between static and weather. You learn when a pause means someone is thinking, and when it means the signal did not make it. Something was wrong with it before I admitted that out loud. I noticed it in late June of 2024, 2 weeks into my summer rotation. The radio began answering too quickly. Not cutting in. Not overlapping. Just responding without the delay you expect when someone reaches for a handset. At first I blamed repeater alignment. Heat does strange things to electronics. I logged it as signal clarity anomaly and kept working. That is rule 1, even if nobody calls it that. Trust your equipment until it proves you cannot. On June 28, 2024, a contract fence repair worker named Eli Parker went missing near the Marks Creek drainage. He was 31. Local hire. 2 kids. He had permission to be out there. No weather event. No fire activity. His truck was found parked cleanly on a service spur less than a mile from his work site. His radio was missing. His body was located 3 days later in a shallow ravine he had no reason to enter. Cause of death was listed as dehydration complicated by disorientation. That is what the paperwork says. Eli broke Rule 4. He followed a call that used his job title. I was on duty the afternoon it happened. At 15:42 hours, I initiated a routine check-in with dispatch. Before I keyed the microphone, the radio spoke. It used my call sign. Correctly. No distortion. No static lead-in. It asked me to confirm visual on a smoke column that did not exist. That was the first confirmed violation. I did not report it that way. Fire lookout towers are built for isolation on purpose. You are alone so your attention does not split. You are alone so routine does not soften your awareness. The rules you follow are not written down. They are passed verbally at the start of a season. Quietly. Without emphasis. Because emphasis invites curiosity. Do not respond to open channel voices that do not follow protocol. Do not confirm visuals you have not personally established. Do not give names unless requested by dispatch. If the radio speaks before you transmit, note the time and wait. That last one is the hardest to follow. Silence feels like negligence. It feels like failing your job. I answered anyway. The voice was male. Late 30s. Neutral accent. It sounded like my supervisor, Alan Breckenridge, who had trained me my first year in the Ochocos. It said the smoke was faint. It asked me to double-check. It did not misuse any codes. That matters. Whatever was on the other end understood procedure. I confirmed negative visual. The voice acknowledged and cleared. Nothing happened immediately. That is where most people misunderstand this. They expect consequence to follow action right away. It does not. The system bends first. Quietly. Like tension in a cable that still looks fine from the outside. A week later, the radio answered before I called again. Different voice. Female this time. Younger. It used my first name. That is when I started keeping a second log. Not the official one. A spiral notebook I kept under the desk. I work in places where rules exist not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. Authority exists. Rules exist. Whatever this was understood both. The thing in the Ochocos does not rush. It does not pursue. It waits for duty to override hesitation. It waits for compassion to override caution. My father, Thomas Mallory, worked seasonal fire for 20 years. He retired early due to lung damage. He lived in Prineville. On July 3, 2024, he volunteered to help with a community fuel reduction project near Big Summit Prairie. He radioed me that afternoon to ask about wind conditions. I told him it was calm. I did not tell him about the voices. That omission killed him. My father was found the next morning less than half a mile from the work site. He was sitting upright against a juniper tree. His gloves were folded beside him. His radio was still on. The last transmission recorded on it was a voice asking him to confirm he was authorized to be there. Rule 7 says you do not respond to authorization requests that do not come from dispatch. Rule 7 does not tell you what to do when the voice sounds like your son. After that, my confidence began to erode faster. Experience did not help. Training did not help. Whatever restraint I had relied on familiarity, and familiarity was now compromised. By mid-July, the radio stopped waiting for nightfall. It respected one limitation. It would not transmit while the interior of the tower was in full direct sunlight. I do not know why. I know we adjusted our behavior around it. Canvas shades stayed open longer than comfortable. Reflective surfaces were avoided. That became standard. On July 19, 2024, dry lightning ignited 2 small fires south of Paulina. I was coordinating with aerial detection when the radio cut in again. It used my father's voice. It asked me why I had not answered him earlier. I stayed on task. I followed the rules. A spot fire crossed a control line while my attention slipped. 38 acres burned. 1 outbuilding lost. This is the part of the job that never makes it into training. Every rule saves someone and costs someone else. Every exception adds another name to the quiet list. I am recording this because the radio is still here. The voices have learned my patterns. They have learned when I will hesitate. They know I will eventually respond, because that is what authority roles are built to do. If you ever find yourself alone in a place where procedure feels heavier than fear, understand this. Rules are not there to protect you. They are there to keep something contained. When the radio uses your call sign before you speak, the test has already begun. I did not leave after my father died. That is the first assumption people make. That staying meant denial, or stubbornness, or some misplaced sense of duty. None of that is accurate. Leaving requires explanation. Explanation requires language. There is no approved language for what happened to him. There is only heat, terrain, and a line item on a report that does not ask follow-up questions. I stayed because by then I understood the difference between danger and exposure. Leaving would not have reduced the danger. It would have increased the exposure. After July, the tone of communications changed without any official notice. No memos. No briefings. Just subtle shifts. Dispatch used fewer names. Check-ins became shorter. Supervisors paused longer before responding. When someone slipped and spoke too freely, there was a gentle correction, then silence. Silence is instructional. My direct supervisor at that point was Karen Holt. She had been with the Forest Service 18 years. Former fire behavior analyst. Calm voice. No superstition. On August 6, 2024, she called me during full daylight and asked a question that does not get asked unless the answer is already suspected. She asked if my radio had ever initiated contact on its own. I said yes. I did not elaborate. She did not ask me to. She passed me Rule 9. If the radio uses a voice you recognize, you do not respond verbally. You acknowledge receipt with tone only. 3 clicks. Nothing else. I asked her what happens if you already answered. There was a long pause. Long enough that I checked the handset to make sure the connection had not dropped. Then she said you slow the spread as much as you can. 2 days later, the rule was tested. The Ochocos went under a red flag warning. High temperature. Single-digit humidity. Wind steady out of the southwest. No active fires in my sector, but everything was primed. I was on a 12-hour watch. Fatigue matters. Whatever is listening understands that. At 14:26 hours, the radio keyed itself. That should not be possible. No audio. Just an open carrier. A low hiss. The tower interior was bright. Full sun through all 4 windows. The limitation should have held. I waited. I logged the time. I did not respond. The hiss resolved into a voice anyway. It was Karen Holt. She said there had been an injury at another lookout. She told me to call her cell immediately. The choice came faster than I was ready for. I broke Rule 9. I called Karen's cell. She answered on the first ring. She was at her desk in Bend. No injury. No incident. She told me to stop speaking immediately. She told me to put the radio down and step outside the tower into direct sunlight. She stayed on the line while I did. I could hear her breathing. Even. Controlled. She had done this before. When I came back inside, the radio was silent. Karen told me to end my shift early. She told me not to log the incident officially. She told me to write it down privately and bring it to the end of season review. That review never happened. 2 weeks earlier, a utilities contractor assigned to a nearby relay station ignored the same instruction. His radio was recovered powered on. His body was found seated beside fully serviced equipment. The incident was closed as procedural error. By September, my sleep pattern was broken beyond repair. 2 hours at a time. Sometimes less. You start to hear your own thoughts externally when that happens. That makes it easier for something else to blend in. It does not need to be loud. It just needs to be plausible. The next violation came from compassion. On September 12, 2024, a high school cross-country runner named Marisol Vega went missing during an early morning training run near Walton Lake. 17. Honor student. Solo, but on a known loop. Search and rescue mobilized by afternoon. I was asked to extend my watch into the night to assist with visual spotting. That is allowed during active incidents. At 21:18 hours, the radio transmitted Marisol's voice. She said she was lost. She said she was cold. She said she could see my tower light and asked me to tell her where to go. Rule 14 says you do not provide navigational guidance after dark without visual confirmation. I could see nothing. No headlamp. No movement. Just trees and shadow. I thought about my father. I thought about how his radio had been left on. I spoke. I gave her directions. Slow. Careful. I told myself I was helping. The voice thanked me. The radio went silent. Marisol's body was found the following spring. She had moved uphill. Away from the trail. Toward a ridge with no access road. That night cost me more than another name. It cost me my ability to trust my own intent. Following the rules hurts people. Breaking them hurts people. The difference is whether the damage stays localized. Karen Holt was removed from her position in October. Officially due to reassignment. Unofficially because she had started warning new lookouts too directly. I was not reassigned. That is another pattern. You do not move the ones who already understand the boundaries. I remained because the entity still could not force me out of the tower in full daylight. That remained its limitation. It could speak. It could mimic. It could wait. It could not cross the threshold when the sun was direct. Knowing that did not make me safer. It only defined the edges of the enclosure. Every night, the radio tested me. Sometimes with voices. Sometimes with static. Sometimes with silence where an answer should be. It used my call sign like it belonged to it. I am continuing this record because the system relies on people like me staying quiet. Quiet is how exposure spreads. Quiet is how rules stay incomplete. If you work alone. If you carry a radio. If your tools begin to behave like they recognize you, do not assume malfunction. Assume attention. I am not asking you to believe this. I am asking you to be careful what you answer. September bled into October without a clean break. The Ochocos do not announce the season change. They just dry out differently. Needles fall. Nights cool. Sound carries farther. Radios become sharper. You notice small things because there is nothing else competing for attention. I stayed through it because nobody told me not to. That matters. When assignments end, you are told. When something is being managed, you are left where you are. Round Mountain remained staffed while 2 other lookouts in the district were shut down early. Official reason was resource optimization. Unofficially, it meant my post still mattered. Not for fire detection. For containment. My title did not change. Fire Lookout. GS7. 11 years of service. But my function narrowed. I was no longer just observing smoke. I was monitoring behavior. Mine. Dispatch. Anyone who came within radio range. Rule 18 reached me in early October. It was passed during a handoff call that should not have happened. The voice on the other end did not identify themselves. No name. No call sign. Just procedure. If the radio initiates contact 3 times within 1 hour, you are no longer speaking to dispatch. You are speaking to the environment. You end all transmission attempts until sunrise. That rule saved my life once. It killed someone else. On October 11th, a wind event rolled through the southern Ochocos faster than forecast. Gusts over 50. Visibility fluctuating with dust and debris. A county road crew operator named Nolan Price was clearing downed limbs along Forest Road 27. His plow stalled when a limb caught the undercarriage. He had a radio. Cell coverage lasted less than a minute before dropping. Nolan called dispatch twice. No answer. The wind was interfering. He called a 3rd time. At 2:09 hours, my radio keyed itself. Nolan's voice came through clear and strained. He said his heater was failing. He said he could see a light on the ridge. He asked if he should walk toward it. That was the 3rd initiation within an hour. Rule 18 applied. I did not respond. This is where people expect a moral pivot. There is none. Silence does not feel neutral when someone is freezing and calling for guidance. It feels like active harm. But the rule exists because responding spreads something larger than the individual moment. Nolan left his vehicle. He walked uphill into the wind. His body was found 2 weeks later when the snow receded enough for a search. Hypothermia. No trauma. His boots were lined up beside him. His radio was switched off. After that, my sleep fractured completely. I slept in intervals. 40 minutes. An hour. Never long enough to reset. Exhaustion changes perception. It makes your own voice sound unfamiliar. The radio adapted to that. It began making small mistakes on purpose. Wind speeds off by a single digit. Coordinates shifted by a few seconds. Not enough to raise alarms. Enough to trigger correction. By late October, it had learned how to sound tired. That detail matters. Authority roles are conditioned to respond to fatigue. When someone on the radio sounds overworked, you compensate without thinking. You fill gaps. You speak when you should not. On October 24, 2024, a temporary communications technician named Eric Holloway was assigned to check the repeater alignment at Round Mountain. He was 26. New hire. Good credentials. He hiked in with a tool pack and a satellite phone. I was not scheduled to be on site. Full staffing protocols discouraged 2 people in the tower unless necessary. Eric insisted on company. He said he worked better when someone else was around. Rule 21 states you do not allow unbriefed personnel to remain in the tower after sundown. I told him to finish quickly and head down. He laughed. He said it would be dark in 30 minutes. He said it was safer to stay. I let him. That decision killed him. At 17:52 hours, the radio transmitted without being keyed. It used Karen Holt's voice. It asked Eric if the alignment bolts were tight. He answered automatically. He did not know Rule 9. He did not know Rule 18. He believed the radio was functioning as designed. I told him to stop speaking. I told him to put the handset down and step outside with me. He hesitated. The voice on the radio told him it was too cold. It said it was unsafe to leave the tower. This was new. The thing had learned how to argue safety. Eric sat down. He took his gloves off. He pressed the transmit button and said he was exhausted. The radio thanked him. By the time I physically pulled him away from the desk, he was already shutting down. Hypothermia. Indoors. Heater running. That detail never made it into the report. After Eric died, my assignment status changed without announcement. Supplies were airdropped. No visitors authorized. No contractors. No overlap. That is not standard practice. That is containment. I started receiving calls from outside my region. Not through official channels. Late at night. Other lookouts. Dam inspectors. Pipeline monitors. Rail signal operators. People who work alone with radios. They did not describe the same place. They described the same behavior. A voice that answers before you call. A voice that uses your call sign correctly. A voice that frames compliance as help. One man from Eastern Washington told me it could not mimic laughter. Another from Nevada said it could not cross running water. Those limitations were regional. The core behavior was consistent. In the Ochocos, the limitation remained stable. Once it had interacted with you directly, it could not initiate transmission while you were standing in full direct sunlight with no reflective surfaces nearby. Glass counted. Metal counted. Snow sometimes counted. Shade always counted. I adjusted my environment accordingly. Canvas shades stayed open longer. Binocular lenses were covered when not in use. Polished surfaces were dulled. These changes impaired my actual job. Dispatch noticed. They asked questions. I deflected. By November, the radio began using my mother's voice. She is alive. Lives in Redmond. Hearing loss in her left ear. The radio did not get that detail wrong. It spoke to me as if she could hear me perfectly. I answered before I realized what I was doing. That was the second violation driven by emotional attachment. The radio repeated my words back slower. Carefully. Like it was learning emphasis. The next morning, I received an official call from a supervisor I had never met. Name withheld. He told me I was being rotated out at the end of the year. He told me to prepare a full handoff. He told me not to include anything unofficial. I asked him if the replacement would be briefed. He paused. Then he said, some things you learn on the job. That was when I understood my role had shifted again. I was no longer just delaying exposure. I was absorbing it. I began recording everything. Every anomaly. Every out-of-sequence transmission. Not for submission. For warning. By December, the radio was answering more often. It did not always wait for darkness. Reflection was enough. Snow on the ground extended its reach. The system moved slower than it did. Policy lagged behind adaptation. I am still here because leaving now would create a vacuum too quickly. Vacuums get filled. If you believe rules exist to keep you safe, you will break them when they hurt. If you understand rules exist to keep something else contained, you will hesitate. That hesitation is the only margin left. The radio is patient. It has learned how we work. I am not better. I am just still functional. By December, the Ochocos settled into a version of quiet that feels intentional. Snow does not fall evenly here. It comes in bands. One ridge white. The next bare. The kind of patchwork that turns reflection into a variable instead of a constant. That mattered more than temperature. My rotation out was scheduled for January. No exact date. Just a window. That uncertainty was deliberate. Transitions are dangerous. Everyone involved knows that. When something is attached to a post instead of a person, moving either one too cleanly creates spread. Round Mountain was no longer listed as fully staffed. Cameras were installed on two sides of the tower. Remote sensors were added for smoke particulates. Dispatch framed it as modernization. What it actually meant was redundancy. The system wanted more eyes so it could rely less on a single voice. That made things worse. The entity adapted to automation faster than people did. It stopped focusing on me directly. Instead, it began shaping the data that triggered human intervention. False positives. Delayed negatives. Minor inconsistencies that required review. Review meant contact. Contact meant opportunity. Rule 28 addresses this phase. It is never written. It is implied through consequence. If automated systems begin escalating without clear cause, human oversight must be reduced, not increased. No one followed that rule. Not because they were careless. Because it feels wrong. You do not step back when alarms increase. You lean in. On December 9, 2024, a smoke sensor east of Mitchell spiked briefly and dropped. Cameras showed nothing. Dispatch flagged it for manual confirmation. They called me. I was in full daylight. Tower interior bright. No reflective surfaces uncovered. The limitation should have held. The radio answered before I spoke. It used my call sign. It reported negative visual. It cleared the alert. Dispatch accepted it. They thanked me. I never touched the handset. That was the first time it spoke for me without prompting and was believed. I reported the discrepancy later. It was logged as latency overlap between automated systems. No follow-up. After that, Dispatch began routing more traffic through my post without calling it that. Messages were phrased as confirmations instead of questions. Acknowledgements instead of requests. Every one of them trained the system to anticipate response. On December 14th, a winter recreation group triggered an emergency beacon near Ochoco Divide. Snowshoers. 4 people. 1 ankle injury. Standard response. Search and rescue mobilized. Helicopters grounded due to wind. Ground teams staged overnight. I was asked to extend watch into the night to assist with visual sweeps. That was allowed. At 20:41 hours, the radio transmitted a voice asking if help was still coming. Calm. Adult. Controlled breathing. It did not match any of the group members' descriptions. That was new. The entity was no longer limited to mimicry. It was generating plausible need. Rule 14 again. No guidance without visual confirmation. I said nothing. The voice acknowledged the silence. It said it understood. It said it would wait. The group was recovered alive the next morning. They reported hearing another person nearby during the night. Someone who sounded calm and reassuring. Someone who told them not to waste energy calling out. That voice did not save them. It delayed them just long enough to matter. After that incident, I stopped believing the problem was localized. That belief had already been eroding, but this confirmed it. The thing did not need to lure individuals anymore. It could influence group behavior. It could scale. I received an unofficial call 3 nights later from a rail signal supervisor in Eastern Oregon. He had gotten my number through an internal chain that did not exist on paper. He asked if I had ever heard his own voice on a maintenance channel when he was not speaking. We compared notes. Different sector. Same patterns. Same rule conflicts. Same guilt. He told me their entity could not operate during scheduled blackout windows. Mine could. That told me something important. These things are not the same. They are related. Cosmic scale does not mean singular. It means distributed. By late December, my name stopped appearing on internal schedules. My call sign remained. Dispatch still addressed it. That separation matters. Authority was being stripped from the person and left with the identifier. I began testing limits carefully. Not provoking. Measuring. If I stood outside the tower in direct sunlight and removed my radio headset entirely, the radio did not transmit. If I stepped back inside but kept the headset off, it transmitted static only. If I put the headset on without speaking, it waited. If I spoke my own call sign aloud without touching the radio, it transmitted immediately. That meant something I did not want to admit yet. It was no longer bound exclusively to the hardware. On December 27th, my mother called me. Directly. Cell signal barely held. She asked why I sounded tired lately. She asked if I was eating. She did not mention the radio. The system had not cut that line yet. That night, the radio used her voice again. Perfectly. It asked me if I was sleeping. I did not answer. The radio waited longer than it ever had before. Almost a full minute. Then it said my call sign again. Softer. That was the third violation driven by emotional attachment that almost happened. Almost counts when you live this close to the edge. January came without ceremony. Snow deepened. Trails closed. Helicopter access restricted. My exit window narrowed. On January 6, 2025, a maintenance pilot named Aaron Beck was dispatched to do a low-altitude flyover of Round Mountain to assess snow load on the tower. He was not briefed on any anomalies. He was told the post was semi-automated. He was given my call sign for situational awareness. At 10:12 hours, the radio transmitted to him. It used my call sign. It told him visibility was clear and advised a closer pass. I heard the transmission. I did not respond. Aaron trusted it. He trusted the authority embedded in the voice. A downdraft caught the helicopter as it banked. Whiteout from rotor wash. Hard landing in a clearing. He survived. His observer did not. The investigation cited sudden weather change. No fault assigned. That was the last high-impact consequence tied directly to my post before removal accelerated. After that, the system moved quickly. Liability management. Risk mitigation. I was instructed to prepare to hike out on January 20th, daylight only. No replacement assigned. Round Mountain would be unmanned going forward. Unmanned does not mean unmonitored. It means unchallenged. The radio knew the timeline before I did. On January 18th, it transmitted a steady open carrier tone for nearly 3 minutes. No voice. No modulation. Just presence. I stood in direct sunlight. All windows uncovered. Snow reflecting everywhere. The limitation should have held. The tone did not stop. That was when I understood the truth I had been avoiding. Limitations are not walls. They are delays. They buy time. Nothing more. I packed essentials only. Logs were left behind. They said they would be retrieved later. They were not. I left Round Mountain at 9:47 hours on January 20th, clear sky. No wind. Perfect conditions. I did not look back. Looking back invites narrative. Narrative invites response. The radio stayed silent the entire hike out. That silence felt heavier than any voice. The silence did not follow me all the way down. That is important. If it had, this would be a different record. It broke 3 miles from the trailhead. I was still within radio range of Round Mountain. That overlap zone is intentional. It gives dispatch a margin to confirm a safe exit. It also gives anything else time to test continuity. At 12:14 hours, my handset crackled once. No voice. Just a short burst of static that resolved into my call sign spoken incorrectly. 1 syllable stressed wrong. That detail mattered more than the sound itself. It meant the thing was no longer just repeating. It was approximating. I did not respond. By the time I reached my truck, the radio was silent again. I reported my exit by satellite phone as instructed. The call was logged. I was told to proceed home and await further contact. No debrief date was given. That was another signal. Debriefs only happen when something is meant to be corrected. This was not. For the first week after leaving the Ochocos, nothing happened. No voices. No anomalies. I slept more than I had in months. My appetite came back. My hands stopped shaking when I reached for things. That lull almost convinced me the attachment had ended. It had not. It had just changed vectors. On January 28, 2025, I received an email from District Operations asking me to review automated alert logs from Round Mountain for quality assurance. That request should have gone to Boise. It came to me instead. The files were clean. Too clean. No false positives. No latency gaps. Perfect compliance. Systems do not behave like that in winter. At the bottom of the log was a single annotation. No author listed. No timestamp. Just a note. Observer unavailable. Call sign active. I forwarded the file to the address listed in the header. It bounced back as undeliverable. That night, my personal phone rang at 2:37 hours. Unknown number. I did not answer. The voicemail that followed contained no voice. Just open air. Wind. Then my call sign spoken once, clearly, and the line cut. That was the first time it reached me without infrastructure. I moved apartments the following week. That was not paranoia. That was procedure. You change variables to see what persists. It persisted. My radio had been turned in as required. My satellite phone was returned. I was no longer carrying any Forest Service equipment. That should have mattered. It did not. On February 9, 2025, I was called in for an informal debrief. 2 people present. Neither introduced themselves by title. They asked about equipment handling. about fatigue, about decision-making under stress. They did not ask about voices. When I mentioned the annotation in the log file, one of them made a note. The other did not react. At the end of the meeting, I was told my service record was solid. I was thanked for my professionalism. I was advised to take time before seeking another assignment. That was not advice. It was containment. I began hearing about incidents indirectly. A dam monitoring station in eastern Oregon reporting confirmations that no one remembered making. A rural EMS dispatcher logging calls that did not appear in the system. A volunteer fire captain in Idaho who swore his own radio told him to stand down during a grass fire, then thanked him afterward. Different regions. Same behavior. Whatever this was, it did not stay where it was first noticed. It moved through role familiarity, through call signs, through procedures designed to reduce friction. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I stopped using voice assistants. I covered microphones when not in use. None of that stopped it completely. It just reduced frequency. The next loss was not someone I knew personally. On March 3, 2025, a volunteer search coordinator named Hannah Pike went missing near the Ochoco Mountains. She had been in contact with a fire lookout there minutes before her last check-in. That lookout resigned 2 days later. No statement given. Her disappearance was ruled terrain-related. I recognized the pattern in the public report. The phrasing. The omissions. I knew what had been taken out because I had done it myself. That recognition cost me something else. I stopped believing this was survivable in the long term. Delay does not equal escape. It just spreads the cost over time. By mid-March, I understood why people like me are kept quiet after exposure. We become references. Other operators call us. They ask what to do. Every answer trains the thing further. Silence protects more people than explanation ever could. I still answer some calls. Carefully. With less detail than feels responsible. That is another erosion. Choosing ignorance because knowledge has consequences. On March 21st, the radio spoke to me again. Not through a device. Through a reflection. I was stopped at a red light. Windshield clean. Sun low. The glass caught my own face back at me. My mouth did not move. My call sign did. That was the moment I accepted the final limitation had fallen. It no longer required equipment. It required attention. I did not speak. I did not react. I drove on when the light changed. Since then, the frequency has decreased. Not because it failed. Because it learned restraint. I'm recording this now because proximity still matters. Time matters. Warning matters even when prevention is impossible. If you work in a role where voices carry authority. If you use call signs. If your job requires you to respond when addressed, understand this. Whatever answers before you speak is not helping you. It is practicing. I am not finished yet. I am still alive. That does not mean I am safe. The rules still matter. They just do not end things. They slow them. And slowing something like this is the only control we were ever meant to have. By April, the calendar stopped being useful to me again. Not because time felt unreal, but because the pattern had stabilized. When something reaches equilibrium, you stop measuring change. You start measuring tolerance. I was no longer employed by the Forest Service. That separation was clean on paper. Equipment turned in. Access revoked. Credentials expired. I was no longer an authority figure in any official sense. That distinction mattered to the agency. It did not matter to the thing that had learned my call sign. What I did not expect was how much of my identity had been procedural. Without check-ins, without logs, without a radio to anchor my day, I felt less defined. That absence created space. Space invites occupation. The first weeks after my exit were quiet enough to feel convincing. No reflections. No tones. No voices. I allowed myself to believe the distance had worked. That belief lasted until I noticed how often I was listening anyway. You do not unlearn vigilance. You redirect it. I started noticing pauses in conversations. The fraction of a second before someone answered a question. The way people hesitated when addressed by name. Most of the time, it meant nothing. Sometimes, it meant everything. On April 17, 2025, I received a call from a former colleague I had not spoken to since my first year. His name was Peter Klein. He had transferred to a remote monitoring position in Northern California. Pipeline oversight. Lone shifts. Night rotation. He asked me one question before he said anything else. Has your radio ever answered you before you called? I did not answer immediately. That silence was deliberate. Peter told me his system had started acknowledging pressure readings he had not reported yet. Small corrections. Helpful reminders. The voice sounded like his supervisor. The supervisor denied it. Peter wanted to know what rule he had broken. I told him the truth. That there was no first rule written for this. Only last ones. I told him not to give names. I told him not to respond to familiarity. I told him to log privately. I told him to reduce interaction wherever possible. I told him sunlight mattered, but only sometimes. I told him to be careful with reflections. I could hear him writing things down. 2 weeks later, Peter stopped answering my calls. His resignation was announced quietly. No incident cited. I do not know if he survived. I know the pattern well enough not to ask. That is the cost of warnings. They ripple. By May, I had stopped trying to document every anomaly. There were too many. Some were small enough to be dismissed. Others were large enough to make denial impossible. What mattered was not frequency, but behavior. The thing did not seek attention anymore. It sought confirmation. Confirmation that procedures still worked. That authority still carried weight. That voices spoken with the right cadence still moved people where they needed to go. I started to see the larger shape of it then. Not an invasion. Not a haunting. An inheritance. We built systems to make ourselves safer. Radios. Call signs. Protocols. Chains of command. Each one removes hesitation. Each one rewards compliance. Each one assumes the voice on the other end is human. Something older learned to live inside that assumption. It did not need belief. It needed response. In June, I was asked to consult informally on a training update. Not officially. No byline. Just feedback. They wanted language that encouraged restraint during ambiguous communication events. They wanted to know how to phrase it without causing panic. I declined. Not because I did not care. Because codifying the rules would finish teaching it. Rules spoken quietly limit exposure. Rules written down invite optimization. That is the part most people do not understand. This thing does not break rules. It studies them. It waits until following them causes harm. There is one rule I never passed on, even verbally. Not because it would save anyone, but because it might spread faster if named. If a voice ever thanks you for complying, stop immediately. That gratitude is not relief. It is reinforcement. By July, the incidents were no longer isolated to wilderness or infrastructure. I heard about a shipping coordinator whose internal system approved a reroute before she entered the request. About a hospital tech whose intercom announced a code that had not been called yet. About an air traffic trainee whose headset corrected a call sign mid-transmission, politely. These were not public stories. They were shared in side channels. In late-night messages. In voices lowered instinctively. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. I am saying it now because delay has reached its limit. Whatever this is, it cannot be stopped. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be isolated to one mountain range or one frequency band. It does not want bodies. It wants behavior. It wants us predictable. It wants us responsive. Its one consistent limitation remains attention without engagement. It can listen. It can anticipate. But it still needs us to answer. That is the narrowest margin we have left. If you are hearing this and you work in a role where response is expected, understand the difference between duty and reflex. Duty involves judgment. Reflex does not. Do not answer voices that address you before you speak. Do not trust voices that sound familiar when protocol says they should not be there. Do not give names freely. Names are handles. If a rule conflicts with compassion, choose the rule that reduces communication, not the one that feels kind in the moment. Kindness is a lever. If you hear your own voice coming from somewhere it should not be, do not correct it. Correction teaches. Log privately. Share carefully. Silence is not cowardice here. It is containment. I am Jacob Aaron Mallory, former fire lookout. 11 years of service. Ochoco National Forest. This is not a story meant to frighten you. It is a record meant to slow something down. It already knows how we work. It already knows our call signs. What it does not know yet is how many of us will stop answering. That decision is yours. If you are listening to this on a device that identifies you by name, turn it off before it learns how you respond.